The noon sun hung heavy over the small frontier station, thickening the heat until it felt like a hand pressing Clara down into the cracked wooden platform. She shifted her newborn daughter in her arms, trying to shade the tiny face with the corner of her shawl, though the fabric was already stiff with dust. The baby whimpered a soft, exhausted cry that sliced straight through Clara's already trembling heart. He should have been here by now. The train that brought her had rattled away more than an hour ago, its smoke a long vanished trail in the sky. Passengers had come and gone. Freight had been unloaded. Shopkeepers had returned to their stores. But she was still standing there, alone except for the sleeping weight of her child. She clutched the creased letter in her pocket, the one that had given her hope when she needed it most. The man who wrote it promised marriage, shelter, and safety. He promised he didn't care that she was arriving with a baby. He even sent fare for the train. For weeks, those promises were all she had. But as the minutes slipped into an unforgiving silence, the truth settled in her chest like a stone dot. No one was coming. Her baby stirred again, a tiny fist pushing against her shawl. Clara kissed the warm forehead, trying to swallow the rising panic. Everything she owned fit into the small carpet bag by her feet. She had no money left, no relatives waiting, no second plan. All she had was a hope that now felt foolish, dangerous, childish. A gust of wind kicked dust across the platform. A few townsfolk watched her from the boardwalk, the women whispering behind hands, the men frowning as though she were already a problem they didn't want to claim. One older woman shook her head, muttering something Clara couldn't quite hear, though she didn't need the exact words to understand the judgment behind them. The station master emerged from his tiny office, wiping his face with a handkerchief. He paused when he saw Clara still standing there, then approached with a stiff, uncomfortable politeness. "Ma'am," he began, tipping his hat even as his eyes flicked to the baby with clear unease. "It seems your gentleman isn't arriving today." Clara forced a breath. Perhaps he was delayed. Perhaps. His sigh was long, pointed, weary. But the next coach won't come through until tomorrow evening, and most passengers don't miss more than one. Behind him, a few men nodded, as if confirming that she had been officially, publicly abandoned. Clara's throat tightened. She tried to ask if there was an inn, a boarding house, anything she could rent for a night, but the truth hit her again. She had no money to rent anything. She couldn't even afford another train ticket. The station master hesitated before speaking again. "We've had stranded folks before. But with a child? Well, it'll be hard for you." That was when her knees weakened. Her baby let out a thin cry, a sound that splintered Clara's thin resolve. She bounced her gently, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. "It's all right, sweet girl. Mama's here. Mama's trying." The onlookers began drifting away, murmuring that she should try another town, or ask the sheriff, or find work in the laundry. Each suggestion felt like another door closing before she could even approach it. She turned, stepping off the platform as if she could walk somewhere, anywhere, without collapsing. But her legs trembled with exhaustion. She hadn't slept more than an hour at a time since before the birth. She had eaten almost nothing on the journey. She was one breath away from sinking to the dusty ground. Then a deep, calm voice reached her. "You look tired." Clara startled, clutching her child closer. From behind the freight wagon stepped a tall man with strong shoulders and dark hair braided neatly down his back. His clothing was simple buckskin shirt, work-worn boots, but clean and cared for. His presence was quiet, steady, like a mountain standing untouched by the wind. He didn't come too close. He didn't crowd her. He simply regarded her with gentle, unreadable eyes. "Let me hold you both," he said softly. For a moment, Clara couldn't breathe. No one spoke to her like that. No one offered kindness without asking something in return, and certainly no one offered it with such calm certainty as though helping her were the most natural thing in the world. The station master stepped back. Awkward and suddenly very silent, Clara stared at the stranger. Heart pounding, baby crying softly against her chest. She didn't know him, but in that moment, surrounded by judgment, heat, and the crushing reality of being abandoned, he was the only person who looked at her with compassion instead of suspicion, and she didn't know whether to fear him or fall into the safety he offered. Clara's breath caught as the tall man stood quietly near the wagon's shadow, letting her decide whether his closeness was welcome. He didn't reach for her baby. He didn't touch her arm. He simply offered his presence, calm, steady, unmoving, like someone used to dealing with frightened horses or skittish people. "I won't harm you," he said gently, his low voice carrying a quiet honesty. "My name is Nakai." Clara swallowed hard, clutching her daughter just a little tighter. I don't know you." "That is true," he nodded. "But you are tired. And the baby is tired. You need water and shade." His eyes moved to her child, softening with something almost like grief. "The sun is too much for one so small." Clara's throat tightened at the sincerity in his voice. No judgment, no impatience, no condescension, just concern. And yet she hesitated, not because she sensed danger, but because kindness, especially from a stranger, felt like a luxury she didn't know how to accept. Back on the platform, a group of townspeople lingered, pretending to mind their own business while clearly watching every second. Clara could almost hear their whispers. She should stay away from him. She's desperate enough to trust anyone. That's what she gets for coming with a baby. Their words were like needles against her skin. She looked down at her daughter, red-faced from the heat, lips dry. Time was slipping away. She couldn't stand out in the sun another hour searching for pride or certainty. She needed help, real help, not the judgment disguised as advice she'd been offered so far. She took a slow breath. Where would you take us?" Nake glanced toward the road leading out of town. "My family kept a cabin near the horses I train. It is quiet, cool inside, water from the spring behind it. You and the baby may rest there." Clara felt a flicker of instinctive fear going to a stranger's home, but she could hear the unspoken promise in his tone. No obligation. He had offered shelter, not ownership. Rest, not a bargain. Why? The word escaped her before she could stop it. "Why help me?" Nakai's eyes held hers, steady and sincere. "Because you need help, and because someone once helped my family when we were strangers in trouble." His voice lowered. Kindness should not be so rare. Clara's breath trembled. She shifted her daughter, whose cry had weakened into a fretful whimper. The little one's cheeks were flushed, eyelids fluttering. Clara felt the rising panic of a mother sensing danger she couldn't fix. With a trembling nod, she whispered, "All right." Nakai dipped his head in gratitude. Not triumph. Not pride. Gratitude, as if the trust she'd offered was something sacred. "May I carry your bag?" he asked. She hesitated, then handed it to him. He took it with careful, deliberate movements, and when she shifted her baby in her arms to follow, her knees almost buckled from exhaustion. Nakai saw it. Without a word, he stepped forward, not to lift the baby, not to force anything, but to offer his forearm for her balance. Clara stared at the strong line of muscle beneath his buckskin sleeve. A working man's arm, steady, reliable. "Lean if you need," he murmured. So she did. The walk out of town felt like leaving behind the weight of every whisper. A few people stared. A few shook their heads. But no one stepped forward to stop her or offer a better option. Only Nakai walked at her side, silent as a cool breeze after heat. They followed a narrow path beyond the last buildings, where wild grasses swayed in waves of gold and green. Birds called from the mesquite trees, and a faint smell of wild sage drifted through the air. The world felt softer here, less sharp. After a few minutes, Clara asked quietly, "Do you live alone?" "Yes," he replied. "Since my family passed." His tone held sorrow but no bitterness. "I train horses for the ranchers. It keeps me busy." She nodded, sensing that his loneliness was real but not dangerous. More like the kind of solitude a person chooses after life has taken too much. "And you?" he asked gently. "You came far." "Too far," she whispered. Her voice cracked, and she hated the sound. She had not cried since the train, refusing to look weak in front of strangers. But walking beside Nakai, with nothing but open sky around them, the truth spilled out. "The man who promised to marry me never came," she confessed. "I have nothing left." Nakai stopped walking. Slowly, so she wouldn't startle, he turned to her. "You have your child," he said softly. "And you have strength. More than you know." Her eyes stung. They continued walking until the small cabin appeared between cottonwood trees, smoke curling gently from its chimney as if it had been waiting for her. Nakai stepped aside, letting her approach first. "You may stay as long as you need," he said quietly. "No debt, no fear." His voice softened to a whisper. "You and the little one are safe here." And for the first time since the train pulled away, Clara believed it. The cabin came into view through a stand of tall cottonwoods, their pale leaves trembling in the light breeze. Compared to the dusty town with its harsh stares and sharper whispers, this place felt like an entirely different world, a pocket of quiet carved out just for her and her baby. Clara slowed, taking it in with a mixture of wonder and disbelief. It was small. Yes, just one room with a lean-to shed, but it was tidy. Smoke curling softly from the stone chimney, as if someone had been tending it with care. A horse grazed nearby, ears flicking up as Nakai and Clara approached, but the animal didn't shy away. Instead, it lifted its head as though accustomed to the calm presence of its owner. Nakai stepped ahead only far enough to push open the door. He didn't usher her inside. Instead, he gestured gently, letting her make the first move. "You and the little one go in," he said, voice humble and quiet. "It is not grand, but it is clean. And warm." Clara stepped past him, hesitating only a moment before crossing the threshold. She wasn't prepared for what she found. The inside smelled faintly of cedar and dried herbs. Sunlight filtered through a small window, falling across neatly arranged shelves filled with jars of plants, folded blankets, and carefully kept tools. A simple table stood near the window, and a sturdy wooden cradle pushed against the far wall immediately caught her eye. She froze. The cradle was empty, but smooth and worn from use. Someone had once rocked a child there many times. The realization hit her with a tender ache. Nakai must have noticed her staring, for his voice came from behind her, low and soft. "It was my daughter's," he said. "You may use it if you wish." Clara's breath wavered. She placed her palm lightly on the cradle's edge. The wood was warm, polished by time and touch. She didn't know this man, not truly, but in that moment she felt the echo of his past, of a life full of love and loss. She whispered, almost afraid to break the quiet, "Thank you." Nakai nodded once. Clara's daughter let out a soft, hungry mewl, reminding her of her urgency. Nakai gestured toward the corner where a small pot hung above the fire. "I will warm water," he said. "For washing or for your tea. Sit, rest." She sat slowly, sinking onto a chair near the hearth. Her legs trembled with relief. Her baby shifted in her arms, tiny face scrunched with discomfort, and Clara whispered soothingly as she adjusted the shawl. Nakai moved quietly around the cabin, his footsteps soft, his motions unhurried. He filled a tin basin with water from a jug, set it near the fire, and then gently added herbs to the pot suspended over the flames. The scent rose almost immediately, calming, earthy, clean. Clara watched him, unable to stop the flicker of awe that grew in her chest. He did everything with intention, with respect, as if her presence didn't inconvenience him at all, as if opening his home to her was as natural as breathing. He didn't ask intrusive questions, didn't probe her past, didn't ask why she'd come or why she'd been abandoned at the station. He simply offered help, the kind she had prayed for but never expected. When the water was ready, he knelt not in front of her, but beside the hearth, placing the basin within her reach. "For the baby," he said softly. "Cool enough now." Clara bathed her daughter's face and hands, wiping away the dust of the long journey. The child relaxed instantly, soothed by the warmth, and Clara kissed her tiny forehead, overwhelmed with tenderness. "You are safe," she murmured. She didn't know if she was saying it for the baby or for herself. When she finished, Nake offered her a bowl of simple soup, wild herbs, bits of soft-cooked vegetables, warm broth. Clara hesitated. She hadn't eaten well in days, but pride clung stubbornly to her ribs. "It is nothing fancy," Nake said gently, as if sensing her hesitation. "But it will give you strength." She took it. The first spoonful burned her tongue slightly, and she bit her lip to keep from crying right there at the table. She hadn't tasted anything warm since the station she'd left far behind. She hadn't felt this safe in even longer. Her baby slept in her lap, clean and peaceful. The cradle waited nearby. When she finished eating, Nakai took the bowl and washed it without a word. Then he added quietly, "You may rest here as long as you choose. Tomorrow, or many days. No one will bother you." Clara swallowed, the knot in her chest loosening one slow inch at a time. She looked at the cradle again, then at the man who had offered her nothing but kindness. "This is more than I could have hoped for," she whispered. Nakai shook his head slowly. "It is what any person deserves," he said. "A place to breathe, a place to heal." And for the first time since she stepped off that train, Clara allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone in the world anymore. The cabin had settled into a gentle quiet as the afternoon light shifted through the small window, painting the wooden floor in warm stripes. Clara sat near the hearth, her daughter curled against her chest, sleeping lightly after the warmth, the bath, and the soothing rhythm of Nakai's calm presence. She had expected a stranger to look at her with curiosity or worse, judgment. But he had not. He moved around the cabin as if her presence were normal, as if she belonged there. After a long silence, she dared to glance at him. Nakai was arranging kindling by the hearth, his strong hand steady, his movements deliberate. There was an ease to him, but also a quiet heaviness that tugged at her chest. She had noticed it from the first moment he spoke his calm, his certainty, but now, in the dimming light, the weight behind his eyes became unmistakable. "You've been kind," she said softly, hesitant, almost afraid to disturb the quiet. "More than I expected. More than anyone has been for a long time." Nakai paused, hands resting on the edge of the firewood stack. He didn't meet her eyes immediately. When he finally did, they were dark, steady, and held something fragile beneath the strength. "Kindness costs nothing," he said finally, "and yet many fear giving it." Clara studied him, feeling a tug of empathy, sensing that his calm had been carved from long struggle. You've been through loss, haven't you?" Her voice was barely a whisper. He nodded slowly, a subtle tilt of the head that spoke volumes. "Yes," he said simply. "A long time ago, I had a family, a wife and a daughter." His voice was steady, but there was a softness, a grief that softened the edges of the room. I lost them to illness. One winter, I have not forgotten them." Clara's fingers tightened around her daughter's tiny hand. She could feel the sorrow in his words like a wind stirring dust. "I'm sorry," she murmured. Words felt fragile in the face of such quiet loss, yet she meant them. Naka shook his head gently. "There is no need for pity. Life has a way of teaching what the heart can endure. And yet," he glanced toward the window where sunlight caught the edges of the cottonwood leaves, "it teaches appreciation as well." His eyes returned to her, calm but open, and for a moment Clara felt that he saw her completely, not just her, but her daughter, her exhaustion, her fear, and the quiet strength she had carried across miles of uncertainty. "You've given us shelter," Clara said, her voice catching. "You didn't have to. You didn't ask for anything in return." She paused, unsure how to continue. She had always lived with expectation, letters promising marriage, letters promising safety, but never anyone simply offering kindness without conditions. Nakai's lips curved into a faint, wistful smile. "Sometimes helping is all a person can do. We have little in our hands, but what we give can be enough." The fire crackled, filling the room with soft warmth, and for the first time since the station, Clara felt a sense of ease. Not complete safety, she knew better than to trust too quickly, but a fragile hope that there could be people in the world who were honest, who were gentle, who carried their grief without letting it crush others. She thought of the town she had left behind, the whispers, the judging eyes, the abandoned promises. Here, in this small cabin, none of that mattered. Here, a man who had suffered knew suffering, and yet still offered comfort. Her daughter stirred, making a soft cooing sound, and Clara bent to brush a strand of hair from the tiny face. Nakai stepped closer, standing quietly near the doorway, as if giving her the space to be herself. His presence was not commanding, not intrusive, but protective. "You are safe here," he said softly. "And if you choose, you may stay as long as you need." Clara's eyes filled, not from fear, not from despair, but from the warmth of something rare, unconditional acceptance. She realized that Nakai's grief had shaped him, had tempered him, and yet it had not hardened him. He had lived through loss, and still, he had space in his heart for strangers, for a mother and child in need. The sun slipped lower, casting long shadows across the cabin floor. Clara felt the weight of exhaustion press against her bones, but it was no longer heavy in the same way. It was softened by the quiet presence of a man who understood loss and had chosen, without question, to offer safety. "Thank you," she whispered again, almost to herself, "for everything." Naka's gaze softened, gentle but unreadable. "Rest now. You and the little one need it. There will be time for words later." Clara nodded, settling against the cushions by the fire, her daughter resting peacefully in her arms. She realized something new. For the first time in weeks, perhaps months, she could allow herself to breathe. The weight of abandonment and fear had been eased, if only a little, by someone who had known sorrow and still extended a hand, and for the first time she allowed herself to hope that tomorrow, and the days after, might be a little brighter. The first night in Nakai's cabin passed with a quiet that was almost unbelievable. Clara slept lightly, her daughter nestled against her chest, both of them breathing more easily than they had since arriving at the station. She had allowed herself a small measure of hope, a fragile sense that maybe, for the first time, she could rest without fear of abandonment. But the town didn't forget Dot by morning. Word had traveled faster than Clara could imagine. She sensed it before she even stepped outside. Faces peered from windows as she passed by on the way to fetch water. Whispers floated across the market square like dust in the wind. Children stared openly at her. Mothers nudged them to look away, and a few men sneered from doorways. The news had preceded her. The mail-order bride who was left with a baby, now staying with an Apache man, Clara's stomach tightened. Each step toward the town felt heavier than the last, each glance from a passerby a sharpened arrow. She had hoped that being out of the train station, out of the immediate chaos, would offer her relief. But it seemed the world refused to forget her. Nakai walked beside her silently, letting her set the pace. His presence was steady, a shield she didn't ask for but could not ignore. He had carried her bag the night before, ensured her daughter's comfort, and now he simply matched her steps, unspokenly lending courage. "They talk," Clara whispered. More to herself than to him. "They will," he said calmly. His voice was quiet, but each word carried weight, authority, and an unshakable calm. "But their words cannot touch you if you do not let them." She glanced at him, gratitude mixing with the residual anxiety that still clung like dust in her lungs. "But they think they can dictate everything. My choices. Where I stay. Who I trust." Nakai's eyes softened. "Let them think. You have already chosen." The townspeople's stares became bolder as they recognized him, a man known in town for his work with horses, a man respected and feared for his skill and quiet strength. Some frowned, muttering under their breath, while others outright sneered. Why does she stay with him? Doesn't she know the danger? Doesn't she care what people think? Clara kept her gaze lowered, feeling the prick of shame and anger burn in equal measure. Her pride told her to retreat, to run back to the dusty station, to try another town, another stranger, another chance at safety. But she felt the gentle pressure of Nakai's arm, a quiet reminder that she wasn't alone. Suddenly, a man stepped from a doorway, a local merchant she recognized. His eyes were hard, his voice sharp. "That child of yours," he said, looking down at the baby in Clara's arms. "You really think she belongs in a place with him? You could do better. Someone decent. Someone from here." Clara's heart raced. Her instinct was to defend herself, but the words faltered as she glanced at Nakai. He had stepped slightly in front of her, his stance calm but firm, and his gaze fixed on the merchant with a quiet intensity that made the man hesitate. "She is my child," Nakai said softly, measured. "She belongs wherever her mother chooses. Not your concern." The merchant opened his mouth, then closed it, realizing that Nakai would not budge, that his quiet strength was unshakable. The town had whispered warnings, spread gossip, and tried to dictate the lives of those they deemed vulnerable. But Nakai's presence, calm and unwavering, challenged all of it. Clara felt a warmth rise in her chest, a mix of relief and something more complicated. For the first time, she realized that protection didn't have to come with anger or threats. It could come with quiet certainty, with an understanding that some things, like her child and her safety, were beyond anyone else's judgment. Still, the whispers did not stop. Townspeople watched them from windows, called out questions cloaked in concern, or spat words meant to wound. Clara knew she would have to face them and perhaps fight them every day until she could leave the town or until the town accepted what she had chosen. But for now, she walked on, letting Nakai's steady presence guide her. She understood, more clearly than ever, that safety and kindness were rare, and she would not let the fear of gossip or judgment force her back into uncertainty. And when she glanced down at her daughter, tiny fingers curling around her shawl, she made a silent promise. She would protect her child and herself, no matter what the town whispered. Nakai's hand brushed lightly against her bag as they approached the market's edge. "You are not alone," he said, and Clara felt the words anchor her heart. For the first time since the train station, she believed it. The days that followed brought a fragile rhythm to Clara's life. She and her daughter settled into Nakai's cabin, the world outside still whispering and judging, but inside the cabin, The air was soft with the scent of herbs and the steady warmth of the hearth. The baby, whom Clara had named Lila, thrived under Nakai's quiet care. The warmth of the cabin and the gentle routines, giving her small moments of peace. But peace is delicate in a world built on hardship. One morning, Clara noticed a slight change in Lila's breathing. The baby's tiny chest rose and fell faster than usual, her forehead flushed with heat. At first, Clara tried to convince herself it was nothing, just the lingering heat from the cabin and the lingering excitement from the sun on the porch. But as the minutes passed, the flush grew deeper, the small whimpers more urgent, and Clara's heart clenched with rising fear. "Nakai," she called softly, her voice trembling. He was outside tending to the horses, but he was immediately at her side. Alert and composed even as his eyes swept over Lila with keen attention. "She has a fever," Clara whispered, holding the baby closer, her hands shaking. I don't know what to do." Nakai took the baby gently from her arms, cradling her with the same ease and care he had shown since the day they met. He did not speak harshly, did not panic. His hands were firm and warm, and Clara felt a small, trembling relief that she could not have named before. "She is burning up," he murmured softly, checking her forehead, lips, and tiny hands. "We need to cool her gently and keep her hydrated." Clara watched as he moved with a purpose born of experience. He fetched clean cloths, dipped them in cool water, and gently pressed them to Lila's skin, murmuring soft, comforting words. His voice was low and melodic, a rhythm of safety in the midst of chaos. "She will be all right," he said, almost more to her than to the baby, as he continued to work with calm precision. "Breathe slowly. You are strong, and she will follow your strength." Clara felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She had feared so many things on her journey: the train ride, the abandoned station, the townspeople's whispers, but nothing had terrified her like the thought of losing her daughter. And here was Nakai, the man she had just begun to trust, holding her child with a steady hand, guiding her gently, and filling the room with quiet courage. Hours passed in the same patterned soft water, cooling cloths, gentle murmurs, and careful observation. Lila's breathing slowed, the flush in her cheeks faded, and at last her small eyelids fluttered open, meeting Clara's gaze. She cooed softly, a sound so fragile and precious that Clara felt her heart shatter and mend all at once. "She is stronger than she looks," Nakai said softly, eyes never leaving the child. "And she will recover." Clara's hands hovered, almost afraid to touch her daughter as he handed her back, but Nakai gave her a quiet nod, a reassurance that the connection between mother and child had not been broken. She held Lila close, feeling her warmth, listening to her steady breathing, and for the first time in days, she allowed herself to relax. In the quiet aftermath, Clara finally looked at Nakai, really looked. She noticed the lines in his face, the subtle shadow of grief beneath his eyes, and the gentleness with which he had treated her child. There was a depth in him, a tenderness that few could match. And she realized with an almost frightening clarity that she trusted him, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Nakai, as if reading her thoughts, spoke quietly. "You have done well, Clara. Your care gave her the courage to fight. You have strength beyond what you know." She blinked back tears, voice trembling. "I don't know what I would have done without you." He shook his head slightly, almost imperceptibly. "No one should face this alone. We all need hands to help us when the burden is too heavy." For the first time, Clara allowed herself to believe that she was not alone, not only in this moment, but perhaps in the days ahead. Nakasi's calm presence, his knowledge, and his steady heart had saved her child. And more than that, he had offered her something rare in a world that had so often abandoned her: safety, respect, and the quiet promise of care. As the sun dipped low behind the cottonwoods outside, Clara held Lila close and let herself imagine a future where they could remain here, where whispers and judgment held no sway, and where Nakai's steady hand and gentle heart would continue to protect them. For the first time, she dared to hope not just that her baby would survive, but that they both might finally have a home. The morning air carried a sharp edge, the kind that hinted at approaching change. Clara was tending to Lila, her hands brushing the baby's hair back from her forehead, when a familiar sound shattered the fragile peace, the creak of wagon wheels and the clipped calls of horses approaching. Her heart clenched. The letter she had carried so faithfully, the promise of marriage that had guided her journey, he had returned. Her would-be groom. He burst into view, dust coating his boots and the edges of his coat, a self-assured grin on his face. The same arrogance she had felt in every line of his letter seemed to radiate from him, as though no time had passed. As though abandoning her at the station had been nothing more than a slight inconvenience. "Clara," he called, his voice carrying across the small clearing. "I have come to claim what is mine. The child and you belong to me." Clara's heart pounded. Fear, anger, and exhaustion collided in her chest. She stood, clutching Lila protectively, her eyes narrowing. "Claim? You left us at the station. Do you think I would ever?" Her voice broke. Overwhelmed with everything she had endured since that day, the man's eyes flicked to Nakai, standing silently by the edge of the cabin. Naka's presence was calm, measured, but there was an intensity in his gaze that made even the groom hesitate. Clara felt the quiet power in him, the kind that did not shout or threaten, but simply existed. Solid, unwavering. "You'll not lay a hand on them," Nakai said, his voice low but clear. There was no anger, no aggression, only certainty. "They are not property to be taken. Not now. Not ever." The groom laughed, a harsh, mirthless sound. "And who are you to say that? You? A stranger?" Nakai took a single step forward, his eyes locking onto the man with a steadiness that made Clara's stomach twist in awe and relief. "I am someone who sees truth. And the truth is, she has chosen her own path. You are not part of it." The groom's face darkened with rage, but Clara felt a strange, grounding calm as Nakai remained still, unwavering. She had never known a presence so protective, so dignified. He did not raise his voice. He did not threaten. Yet in the absolute stillness of his certainty, he made it clear that no one could touch her or her child. I will not be denied." The groom shouted. He moved forward, a step too fast, his hand twitching toward her shoulder. But Nakai shifted just slightly, a subtle motion, enough to block any approach without breaking the rhythm of his composure. Clara realized she had never seen someone command attention without force, without shouting, without spectacle. "You are not welcome here," Nakai said softly, almost gently. "Leave now, before your arrogance becomes your ruin." The groom froze, sizing Nakai up. There was no room for argument, no loophole, no subtle threat he could employ. This man Nakai was an immovable barrier, quiet but absolute. Humiliation, slow and stinging, replaced the smug arrogance he had carried with him across miles. With a furious glare, he turned his horse and rode back toward the town, leaving Clara and her daughter in the clearing. The dust settling like a curtain over the scene, Clara sank to her knees, hugging Lila to her chest, the tension in her body unraveling. Nakai stepped closer, his shadow stretching across the cabin floor, calm and protective as ever. He crouched slightly, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder, not possessively, but reassuringly, as if to say she was safe and always would be while he stood there. I thought I would always have to face things alone," she whispered, tears brimming. "I thought I would never—" "You will never face it alone again," Nakai said softly. His voice carried the weight of someone who had lived with loss and solitude and chosen, despite it, to protect others. Not if I can help it. Not if I can stand by you. Clara looked up at him, her heart swelling with gratitude and something deeper, something unspoken but undeniable. In that moment, she understood that safety, kindness, and courage were not always loud. They could be quiet. They could be steady. And they could change the course of a life entirely. She held her daughter close, feeling the rise and fall of Lila's tiny chest. Nakai's presence beside them, solid and unwavering, promised a future that once seemed impossible. And for the first time since stepping off that train, Clara allowed herself to imagine a life where they could all belong together, safe and protected. The sun dipped behind the cottonwoods, casting long shadows across the cabin, and Clara realized that the storm of the world could rage on, but here, in this small clearing, they had found something stronger: trust, care, and the beginnings of a home. The clearing around the cabin was calm, the last golden rays of the sun slipping through the cottonwoods. Clara sat on the cabin steps, Lila nestled in her arms, soft breathing finally steady after the recent turmoil. The town's whispers had faded into the distance, and even the memory of the groom's harsh voice felt like a distant echo. Powerless against the quiet strength that now surrounded her, Nakai stood nearby, watching the horses graze, his posture relaxed but alert, a sentinel even in stillness. Clara's eyes kept drifting to him, the man who had appeared from nowhere at the train station, who had offered safety when all hope seemed gone, who had cared for Lila as tenderly as he had cared for his own lost daughter. Was here a presence she could finally rely on. Her heart swelled with gratitude, but also with something deeper, a slow, pulsing awareness of trust and admiration. She had never imagined that someone could enter her life so completely, change the course of her days, and do it without expectation, without demand, without hesitation. Nakai had simply been there, a steady hand in a world that had turned harsh and cruel. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice carrying across the porch, gentle but firm. "For everything. For Lila, for me, for—" "This," Nakai turned, his eyes meeting hers. There was a softness there, a quiet humility, but also a strength that had carried them through the storms of the past days. "I only did what I could," he said. His gaze shifted to Lila, sleeping peacefully against Clara's chest. "I will do more, if you allow me." Clara's fingers traced the baby's hair, and she realized that she wanted more than protection. She wanted a presence she could rely on, someone who understood loss, grief, and quiet courage. She wanted Nakai, and for the first time, she allowed herself to hope not just for safety, but for family, for belonging, for love. I don't know what I can offer," she whispered, unsure if she could voice what her heart was daring to imagine. "I've been alone for so long, I don't know how to—" "You offer yourself," Nakai said softly. "And your child. That is more than enough. It is everything." His voice carried no pressure, no demand, only truth. "I do not ask for your heart, because it is already yours to give. But I offer mine, and I will hold you both. Not just for tonight, not just for tomorrow, but every day you allow me." Clara's tears sprang unbidden. She had expected the world to be cruel, the future uncertain, her child's life fragile. Yet here was a man who offered more than safety. He offered continuity, love, and the promise of family. She allowed herself to let down the walls she had carried for so long, walls built of fear, loneliness, and disappointment. She shifted Lila into Nakai's arms, the baby's tiny hands brushing against his strong, gentle fingers. "Then hold us," Clara whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Hold us if you truly mean it." Nakasi's lips curved into a faint smile, deep and quiet, full of understanding and promise. He took Lila against his chest, rocking her lightly, and then reached out to gently take Clara's hand. "I do," he said simply. "I will hold you both. Not just today, not just tomorrow, but for as long as you will stay." Clara leaned into him, letting the tension of weeks, the fear and anxiety of abandonment, and the weight of carrying her child alone fall away. She realized she was finally safe, not just physically, but emotionally. The cabin, the clearing, the sun slipping behind the trees, all of it became a symbol of the life she had been seeking: stability, warmth, and love earned through courage and trust. The wind stirred the cottonwood leaves. A gentle whisper through the clearing, and Lila cooed softly, resting her tiny head against Nakai's chest. Clara allowed herself to smile through tears, knowing that the moment was a beginning, not just an end. The storm of the world might still rage beyond the trees, but here, in this quiet corner, they had built something stronger: a home, a family, and a love that needed no words, only steady hands and open hearts. For the first time in months, Clara let herself imagine a future where she and her daughter were truly safe. And as Nakai held them both, she felt a profound certainty settle in her soul. They would face whatever came together. They were no longer victims of circumstance. They were a family, united, protected, and held in a love that promised to endure. The sun dipped fully behind the trees, leaving the clearing bathed in soft twilight, and in that quiet, Clara whispered a promise of her own. She would stay. She would trust, and she would let them both be held forever.